Hello everyone, this is Ninja speaking. Welcome to today's episode of the Bootleg Breakdown program, where we're not actually going to look at a Figuarts figure this time, but actually a Figma knockoff in the form of Katsuki Bakugo from the My Hero Academia series. I believe this one was actually sculpted originally by Max Factory, just for the record. Now, as you get this particular one unboxed, it's worth noting that I honestly don't do a lot of different Figma reviews for this particular channel, because generally most of the stuff kind of leans towards my interest. Tends to be the more Dragon Ball stuff, which is why Figuarts is the one that keeps popping up. However, for certain series like this and Kill la Kill, I do make some exceptions here. So as we are getting Bakugo, as we're getting him unboxed there, part of the hat or kind of mask bit, whatever you want to call it, just fell off there, so that was not properly attached by any means. I think even for the real figure though, the attachment is really just kind of pushed in there, kind of wedged in there, and then glued in. So we can see the glue has been missing on this one, so we will be having to fix that later on. Going for the rest of the figure though, presentation wise, first look, it's not too bad, I should say, really. Obviously that thing's going to have to be wedged in there, so yeah, it's a bit of a pressure fit if anything, but otherwise not too bad. Paint wise, I am already noticing there is a bit of a issue with some of the finishes around here, namely around the edges of like the black. There's definitely some, what is it? Yeah, there's some dust or some debris that needs to be cleaned off the figure as a whole, it seems. And in terms of the different paint applications, while something like the solid colors like the gray and green are okay, or at least reasonable enough, you notice a little more with kind of the orange color as well as the black color actually on the main torso. There's some paint scratches or scrapes that have already kind of gotten knocked off, and it's not exactly the cleanest application all around. Joint-wise, everything seems to be holding up pretty well, if I'm being quite frank on that one. Mind you, with the Figma joints, they're not overly complicated, so it's really hard to screw them up more often than not. So if anything, it's going to be something where it's either serviceable, it's tight enough, or maybe in some cases it is a little bit loose, because just kind of as a post-production edit, I do notice this figure does have some additional, or kind of some occasional issues holding its pose if it's in too dynamic of a pose too often, and you don't have the included stand attached. But all in all, it's not bad. If it's something where it's only like a little bit loose, you can work around it and you can fix that up a bit. I'm leaving this little bit of footage of me trying to get the figure to stand up in a little more of a dramatic pose, just as a proof of concept of how the knee joints, at least on mine, are a little more wobbly than I'd care for. So while you can get the figure to normally stand kind of upright on its own, no real issue, for anything more dramatic, I might suggest use the included stand on that one. And speaking of which, that's what we're going to start with for the accessory overlook. As you can see, it's a recreation one. It's obviously not an original one, as you can definitely tell from the casting bubbles inside of the stick part of the stand, but it's serviceable enough. The paint on this secondary face, which is the only other face that Bakugo comes with though, could use some work. Eye decals are a little more simplified than what they should be, but they're generally serviceable. But wow, the mouth paint really needs a touch up on this one. And it also feels like the general quality of the cast is maybe a little softer than it should be. So it's probably been a recreation, or not the recreation, yeah, so the word I'm working has probably been a recasted bit. And I'm not sure what's going on with the head bit. I feel that the transparent bit is definitely not original. If someone has the original figure and can actually confirm or deny it, please let me know in the comments, because I'm actually really curious on that one. And I find, at least on the original face, you can get it to fit back and forth easy enough. However, getting the alternate face, it's a bit of a snug fit. You can kind of get it in there with pressure, but it's not an immediate perfect fit, so you will need to put some effort in order to kind of really shove it in there. In terms of the hair detailing though, I feel it's probably close enough to the other one, but I would say even for a lot of the different details in this figure, I have the suspicion that it's a bit of a softer focus than what it should be. So it might be a few cases where some of the stuff is recasted, but about the right size compared to what the real figure should have, I would figure. Another general aside, I do get about to gluing this fin back on the figure properly after the review is done, but if you notice it pops off 1 or 2 times, it's because I didn't do it during the course of this recording, just for the record. Getting back to the point here, looking at the face here in actual motion or in place, you can see it does hold up decently enough, although yeah, you want to do a bit of a paint touch-up on the teeth there, because that stands out as a bit off. Unfortunately, that's not the only bit that honestly could benefit from a paint touch-up, because all of the hands, I'm going to say, are a little bit on the rough side. As you can see, the hands themselves only really come in 2 colors, the orange and the green, and it's just something about the way they've been applied or spray painted, you can kind of really see that the paints kind of start mixing and blending together. in a messy fashion around the edges where the two different colors meet up there. That's a particularly poignant example right there. And also the paint hasn't necessarily been applied evenly in this case, so especially in the orange it seems to stand out the most. That it's not a very clean application. Some of them are a little heavier. This is a heavier handed one. And honestly, I would probably suggest that's another thing you want to repaint really. The hands could use a fresh coat. As for the effect pieces, however, well, I don't think they're quite using the same kind of opacity, so they might actually be a little more heavy-handed in terms of the covering paint. They honestly look really good still, even in general, so I would say if you need it as a replacement piece, since they seem to be about the same size as the original, it does do the job here. Maybe it's a bit of a snug fit, or I might just be putting the wrong explosion on the wrong hand in this case. But as you can see, they will fit on the peg just fine on there. And with the proper lighting on there, the explosion pieces actually look really good. Alright, here's a picture of Deku beside, or it says a Bootleg Deku beside Bootleg Bakugo. As you can see, the figures are about the same height, which is actually about accurate for what the real figure is for this matter. I'm going to say just a smidge under 5.5 inches, I'd say there. Which is ironic because I think at this point of the series, Bakugo is actually supposed to be a little bit taller than Deku, so the figure itself is a little undersized, but it does seem to match up with what the original figure measured at when I did a quick look. Alright, so aside from some paint issues, I'm going to say the figure seems to hold up relatively well, not counting that head fin that I need to glue after the fact. But the question is, how does the figure hold up when you take it apart? What's it really made out of? So now we're going to look at that, starting with the head bit. Once again, I'm not quite sure what's going on with that little translucent bit, because I've never really seen something like that on any other Figma that I've had up to this point, bootleg or otherwise, so that's a bit interesting. And for the upper body, or the upper part of the torso, something actually interesting about this came up when I did some more research. Namely, it's actually a little undersized compared to the real figure. However, I think because of the way they have the joints in there might be a little more shallow on this toy than the real deal, that might explain how we ended up at roughly the same height as the original. Going to the lower torso though, it's a very simple bit, maybe a little loose on there. I think the way the joints got inserted might explain part of that. As you can see, kind of the hip joint is kind of wedged in there, which means for the actual hips themselves, you kind of have to thread it through in order to get it there, and it's held in mostly by pressure, it looks like. Moving on to the legs themselves, you have kind of the suction cup part of the bit there. It's not exactly the highest quality one, but it does get the job done. And the rest of the leg and knees are about standard, if maybe a slightly simplified version of the joints, maybe a little smoother than they should be. However, they are definitely serviceable enough. Could stand to be a little bit tighter. The boots themselves have a little bit of a swivel to them. The ankle joints are functional, maybe a bit stick out a little more than they should, but they do the job on there. Moving to the other parts of the arms, suction cup at the end, or kind of a just general ball cup there. It's just a solid bit of plastic that the other part is threaded through. And as we look through the wrist there, immediately that joint looks a little bit simplified, but functional. The wrist joint is actually about the same size, if not the exact same size as on the real one, in case you're wondering. So I'd actually say for certain bits in here, if you needed replacement parts for your real figure, you could actually get away with it. However, I just want to note for the little pin on this particular arm, it's a little bent inward. I don't know if it's supposed to move on the real one. It doesn't on the bootleg here for sure, but they aren't on matching angles. This one's a little more of a right angle there, while the other one's a little more bent inward. So that is something I might want to customize and adjust a little more later on. As for the hands, they themselves are pretty much standard. They're just kind of the stick extension that you kind of force on there, so they're held in by pressure. And same thing with the explosions. And for the faces, you only get the two faces, I'm afraid. Mostly decent, except for the teeth on that other one, but otherwise not too bad. I probably put it with the more straight expression just because I feel the paint job is a little better on that one. So, given the choice between the now $90 original and this $30 one that needs a little bit of a paint touch-up, I think this one's a bit of an easy choice. Yeah, if you missed the boat on a cheaper version of it, then yeah, this bootleg will do you just good for that one. Thanks for watching, folks. Catch you later.